a long commute, huh?
Okay, I'm just going to start, and my introduction is gone, so I had something written down so I didn't forget, but that's okay. I have the great pleasure of introducing the second panel and telling you that this panel is really looking at the correctional systems and treatment modalities within prisons and jails in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and to really look at and compare and contrast what's working, what's really being successful in these two systems. And I'm not introducing the panelists because I get to introduce Felice Freyer, who is a Boston Globe reporter. And if you are a regular Boston Globe reporter, which I am, I still get the paper delivered every day to our house and read it, having that tactile sensation, you would know that Felice is the healthcare reporter for the Globe, and today has a very big article above the fold about Governor Baker's initiatives that he announced yesterday. Felice spent 25 years working at the Providence Journal. She's been at the Boston Globe for the last 3.5 years. She has been the recipient of several awards, a Kaiser Media Foundation fellowship. She is the vice president, you'll have to help me, of the National Association of Healthcare Journalists. Is that close? Close. That's close. She was a second place award winner of another very prestigious healthcare journalism award. And she knows, I would say, pretty much everything about what's going on with addiction. She says no, but I've read all of her articles, and she is really extraordinarily knowledgeable, breadth and depth in what's happening with addiction and substance abuse disorders in Massachusetts and I think nationwide. So I'm going to introduce Felice, and she will introduce the panelists. So thank you, Felice.
Thanks. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy to be talking about this topic of prisoners and addiction. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to kind of introduce the topic a little bit. You know, this is one of the most, if we're going to talk about addressing the opioid crisis, we can't not talk about inmates. Because if you just look at the data, in Massachusetts, 58% of state prison inmates and 63% of inmates in houses of correction have a substance use disorder. And that's, you couldn't, anywhere outside of an addiction treatment facility, you could not find any group with such a high concentration of people who are dealing with addiction. So it's both an opportunity when they interact with the criminal justice system, and it's really, some would argue, an obligation to address this group if we're going to deal with it. Just to give you a little background that might help understand things if you're not familiar with the correctional system, in Massachusetts, it's divided into two parts. It's the State Department of Corrections, which oversees 16 prisons, and then there are 14 houses of corrections, which are run by the county sheriffs. And the houses of correction take people who are awaiting trial or who have sentences generally of less than 2.5 years. And the prisons are for people who have more serious crimes and generally longer sentences. Now in Rhode Island, it's all in one place. The jails, the intake center, medium, minimum, maximum security, all in one facility right across from the Whole Foods in Cranston. And so, and they have one doctor and one director. Yes, probably more than one doctor. So, and that's relevant, that's going to be relevant to our discussion in terms of what Rhode Island has been able to accomplish. Also, I want to make a distinction between we need to keep in mind three aspects of addiction treatment when you're talking about inmates. First is when they arrive, they go into withdrawal. And if you're withdrawing from opioids, it's very, very painful. So the first question we have is how do the prisons and jails treat withdrawal? Then there's the period while they're incarcerated. What kind of treatment do they get for their underlying addiction disorder while they're incarcerated? And then there's the reentry issue and what kind of connections are made to the community, and how do you help people not go out there and overdose. And it's also worth mentioning in passing that prisoners are also in great danger, because after they're incarcerated and their tolerance for the drugs they take and that they remain addicted to goes down, they're very, very likely to die of an overdose when they leave, because they'll take the same amount of drugs that they were taking before, and it'll kill them when it hadn't before. So the state's own data show that people who have recently been incarcerated are 120 times more likely to die of an overdose than the general population. So it's very, very serious. So we have an all-star panel here. Some of the people who've done the most work and given the deepest thought to these issues. And I'm going to introduce everybody. We also have a lot of people, so it's going to take me a little while, but it's worth knowing where these people are coming from. So A.T. Wall is the director of the Rhode Island Department of Correction. And you can't say this about very many corrections directors, but A.T. Wall is like a household name, practically a household name in Rhode Island. And that is because he has held this position longer than anyone else since the year 2000. And he's also the longest serving corrections director in the country. He is the immediate past president of the Association of State Correctional Administrators, and Director Wall has undergraduate and law degrees from Yale. And with him, joining him from Rhode Island is Dr. Jennifer Clark. She's been a staff physician at the Rhode Island Department of Corrections since 1998, and she's currently its medical director. She has undergraduate and medical degrees from Cornell, and she served her residency at Brown University, where she also earned a master's in public health. And her research focuses on incarcerated populations, women's health, substance use, and reproductive health. Christopher Mitchell is the Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Reentry at the Massachusetts Department of Corrections. This position he's held since 2016, but he is far from a newbie there. He's been there since 1987, and in those 3 decades, he's promoted the concept that reentry begins at admission. And he's worked on data collection and analysis, risk assessment, and analyzing gaps in services. He has a BA from Bridgewater State College and has received many awards over the years, which he was too modest to list, but I'm sure it's true. And next up, Peter Koutoujian was sworn in as Middlesex County's sheriff in January 2011. As a former public health official and assistant district attorney, Sheriff Koutoujian has worked from the belief that incarceration can be a window of opportunity to address the factors that lead to criminal behavior. So as a result, the Middlesex County House of Correction offers medication-assisted treatment, a specialized veterans program, and a modified cognitive behavioral therapy. In January, Sheriff Koutoujian will become president of the Massachusetts Sheriff's Association. And finally, Dr. Alex Walley is a professor of medicine at Boston University and director of its Addiction Medicine Fellowship, and he's also an addiction medicine specialist at Boston Medical Center. He's one of the go-to guys on addictions. Whenever I'm working on a story about addiction, people say, why don't you ask Alex Walley? And I have to say, well, I can't call him every single time, you know. He's a busy man, and he is indeed, because in addition to his research on the medical complications of substance use, he provides primary care and office-based addiction treatment for patients with HIV. He also runs a methadone maintenance program, and he had a major role in something really significant. He's working with the State Department of Health. He's helped train 60,000 people in the use of Narcan since 2007. So we're divided into 4 parts, each 10 minutes long, and we're going to cram Rhode Island into the first part. So, and I've been ordered, I don't want to be this way, but I've been ordered to be rude, and I'm going to interrupt people if they say jargony things or go on too long. And so Director Wall and Dr. Clark are going to tell us about the remarkable program they've got going in Rhode Island.
Thank you, Felice, for that very generous introduction. I am A.T. Wall, Director Director of the Rhode Island Department of Corrections, and I will tell you at the outset that I don't profess to be a subject matter expert when it comes to addiction medicine. My career has been and continues to be in public safety and institutional security. In fact, when I started in a line-level position some 40 years ago, the field was very much about the criminal mind. An antisocial personality, behavior, and attitudes. Picture the psychopath hiding in the shadows, ready to step out and prey upon the unsuspecting. There are certainly still people like them to contend with, and they are scary. But over the years, we in corrections have been increasingly called upon to address problems of public health as they manifest themselves in such troubling areas as mental illness and substance abuse, its first cousin. If the court sends someone to us, we have to take them in whatever condition we find them, and with an ironclad no-refusal policy, we are a catch basin for all those who have fallen through the cracks. The social safety net exists, but they have fallen through it. They come to us bearing the label of criminals, yet more than 50% of our prisoners have an addiction problem in Rhode Island. 1 out of 7 are opioid dependent, and since 2009, we witnessed a 15-fold increase in overdose deaths traced to fentanyl. Over 1,200 of our neighbors in Rhode Island have been lost to overdose in the last 7 years. That's more than deaths by guns, automobile accidents, and fires combined. Notwithstanding these very disturbing numbers, perhaps what is even more shocking is that some 2 or more years ago, a mere 26 out of 3,100 inmates at our adult correctional institutions were receiving the necessary treatment for opioid abuse. What Dr. Jody Rich, a colleague who has extensive experience in addiction medicine, describes as, quote, a consistent, predictable, all-consuming, chronic, and potentially fatal brain disease, close quote, close quote. In other words, the stakes are very high. Into this alarming epidemic stepped a new governor, Gina Raimondo, who assumed the office in early 2015. To her credit, she understood the urgency of the crisis and took immediate measures to address it. Her very first budget as governor, which was introduced some 3 months after she had won the election, allocated some $2 million specifically to the Department of Corrections for medication-assisted treatment, intended for incarcerated inmates at our facilities. She has continued this support as they return to the community. Believe me, in a state like Rhode Island, we are not a wealthy jurisdiction. $2 million is not chump change. It got everybody's attention. Now what we see is knowledgeable personnel working across our respective disciplines to build and implement a sound and solid plan for MAT-based recovery from substance abuse. Some of these experts have devoted their careers to guiding addicted offenders toward better lives through recovery from the grip of opioid dependency. Our own staff are stepping up, proud of the numerous times they have successfully used Narcan to save inmates from death. As you can imagine, correctional institutions are not necessarily happy places where wonderful things take place all the time. Our staff are gratified to have something positive that they can do while they are supervising the inmates in their custody. The recovery model strongly embraced in our state. As I stated at the outset, we are a public safety agency. And in this context, there is a role for us in corrections, and it is an important one when it comes to substance abuse, diagnosis and treatment. Our staff are acknowledging our mission in new ways, using strategies that are evolving in the field of substance abuse treatment. Names such as Vivitrol, methadone maintenance and withdrawal, the use of Suboxone in our women's and men's institutions. Those are all now common terms among our staff. Our goal is collaboration with other agencies and providers, putting resources into treatment and, post-release, linking them to care. We've come to appreciate, and I count myself among those, that the work we're doing now is also public safety. There's an important role for us in my field. First, by adopting safe and legal means to protect the users from harm. And second, protecting the wider population of our state by reducing the risk of opiate-driven crime. It's been an exciting journey for us, and I expect it will continue. Thank you very much.
All right, so I'm just going to jump into it. I only have, I think, 4 minutes, so I will speak quickly. MAT and corrections, there's a lot of evidence for it. It decreases illicit opiate use after release, decreases criminal behavior, decreases overdose risk, and decreases HIV risk. It's been proven, it's shown, the data is out there. It's also the standard of care. It's endorsed by multiple agencies, all state. They've looked at the evidence is it helps, we should have it available. And it's cost effective. From this slide, you can see this bottom corner, that just means those dots are less money, more lives saved. So when we're providing MAT in corrections, we are saving lives and we are saving dollars. This is just a quick visual, one of the early studies. These represent individuals, 34 individuals, half randomized to methadone, half randomized to regular outpatient care. This is early in the methadone days, so they were randomized, all using heroin. After 2 years, the ones in green, they're doing well. So you can see almost 3/4 of the ones on methadone doing well, not using opiates, healthy. But the group that was not offered methadone, 2 have died, 2 are in prison, 1's doing great, so it's great. 1 person did well without MAT, but you can see the vast majority needed MAT to do well. We also have 3 individuals, 1 lost a leg, 1 had endocarditis, an infection of the heart, and 1 ended up with sepsis. So very expensive medical conditions as well, not to mention the human tragedy of it. After 5 years, they allowed it for everyone, and the people who switched over, the vast majority did well too. And you end up with 5 people being dead in the group that did not go on to MAT. Very, very high mortality rate. We don't see mortality rates like this in many diseases. So what are we doing at the DOC? We have people from intake, so we're a jail and prison, so we have people at intake, they come in. If they're on MAT, we just continue them on MAT. Up to 1 to 2 years, I'm working on that 2-year piece. We screen them for opiate use disorder. Anyone comes in sick, we document that they need MAT, we will start them on MAT. Our third population are people who have been in the system, not on MAT, but want to start MAT. We will start people pre-release also. So we screen them. If they screen positive, we will do a urine test to confirm that they're on, they're using an opiate. We'll then do an assessment, begin an MAT, and the type of MAT, it will be either depot naltrexone, which is a complete opiate blocker. You use opiates, you're not going to feel it, but you can die. So if you keep using opiates, you can overdose to the point of death, but you won't feel high. So most people might try to see, does that really work? That they might try some drugs, they're not going to feel high, but we always have to warn them about the risk of death if they keep on using. Methadone, medication that has no ceiling effect, that means that you can just keep on taking it. We try and get people into this normal range, but people can keep taking doses higher and higher, and they can die of overdoses. Buprenorphine, more commonly known as Suboxone, is a medication which is sort of a leaves the door partially open, has a capping effect, very difficult to overdose on, not impossible, I don't recommend trying it, but it does have this sealing effect, so a lot of people like it because it's safer, less likely to have, go into that point where you decrease respiration. When people come in, when they start on the program, that's when we start discharge planning. Because we're a jail and a prison, we don't know if we have you for 48 hours or 48 months or 48 years. But so when they come in, we start getting ready for them to go out because the vast majority get out very quickly. This is our average daily population. So back when before we started, we were in the low 20s. And then in last October, not this October, we were up to 120. We're now about 240 people on average a day getting treatment. So we're treating a lot more people. That's a daily average. The monthly numbers are closer to 350. So we have about 100 people getting out every month on MAT, so we're connecting them to the community.
Out of how many prisoners?
Out of 3,000. So 3,000 people at any one time, 1,200 coming through the system every year. We estimate between 10 and 20% have an opiate use disorder. My target is probably around, I estimate that we should have about 310 people on MAT at any one time. But it's because it's not a benign medication, we have to do it safely, and we keep building up. These are the different types of MAT. So initially we only had, or mostly had the methadone available, as you can see in the blue here, and those numbers have gone up. This Suboxone or Buprenorphine, those numbers we keep increasing. So the majority of people are on methadone, then Suboxone, then Buprenorphine, and then the depot naltrexone. You might wonder why that number is so low. Most people come in and they're still withdrawing, so that is not an appropriate treatment in withdrawal. It will make people incredibly sick. People have to be off of opiates probably for at least 10 days before they're eligible for that. 1 minute, I'm almost done. These are our numbers. We have about 75% follow-up in the community. And this is just to show the difference between heroin and fentanyl. These two are equivalent. If you want to smuggle in drugs to a prison, you don't have to hide a lot of fentanyl to kill a lot of people. So that's why it is so deadly. It's such a small amount compared to the same amount of heroin. The tip of a matchstick is enough to make 1,000 street value Percocet pills, so fake Percocet pills. It's incredibly dangerous, and that's what's killing our patients. And I am done. Thank you.
I'm ready.
You're next, Chris.
Great.
These are microphones.
Okay. I'll ask that you indulge me for the first 90 seconds of my discussion by going back in history and looking at corrections when I came in '87. Corrections was still reeling from the Nothing Works article that was published by Martinson, and corrections had swung to the right, reintroducing to the joys of busting rocks and things, but there was a subgroup of people up in Canada who said, I've spent my entire career doing things that I know work, so let's look at what it is and then publish it. And that was the Paul Gendros, the Andrews, and very early in my career in 1990, I got a chance to work with Paul Gendros, and he trained us on what was then called the effective principles of correctional program, what works and what doesn't. So at that point in our history in Massachusetts, we started to look at how could we take the theory and apply it. And for 20 years, we partnered with a company called Spectrum Health Systems, and we really started to take substance abuse treatment that historically was offered in the community and convert it to a correctional model that addressed both the substance use and the criminality. And I think over that 20-year period, we were trying to figure out how to do it, and at some point, I think we did it very well. But we didn't really look beyond our walls to figure out how to then transition people into the community. And that was the next phase of our development. But I'll go back to in prison. the legislature started to ask us for legislatively mandated reports demonstrating the effectiveness of our programming, and we were proud to produce reports that showed that our program was reducing recidivism. Within one small group, it didn't. They were the property offenders. And who were the property offenders? The opioid users. And we couldn't figure out why a program that was working with violent offenders, with drug users, yet with this small nonviolent population, it wasn't working, and we figured out to be opioid. That tied into the opioid crisis, and in September 2014, we implemented a medication-assisted treatment program through the use of Vivitrol as a pre-release injection. One of the things that we wanted to do, and our medical provider was very cognizant of, the risk associated with using a medication-assisted treatment program, that it couldn't be the single part of treatment. That we needed to ensure that people had been taking their recovery seriously. So one of the stipulations we included in our protocol that while in prison, you should be addressing your substance abuse issue through our programming. We have 500 residential therapeutic substance abuse beds in our system. So treatment and access to it isn't an issue. So the protocol was a collaboration between NPCH, our medical partner, Spectrum Health Systems, our substance abuse provider, security staff, and a multitude of other partners. We developed what we think was a very good protocol, which, by the way, we borrowed from Barnstable, the most sincerest form of flattery. I'm sure we borrowed from the sheriff as well. That protocol led to a real partnership with a commitment to making this work. So when I look back on why were we successful in implementing a medication-assisted treatment program in an agency that had cultural biases towards medication and fear of it, it's because the leadership said this matters and this is going to be an important thing for us. And we had partners who had historically not talked and worked together, working towards a common goal of getting people access to treatment that met the community standard of care. So, since the implementation of this program, we've issued over 350 pre-release injections to releasing offenders. Of that group, approximately 78% stayed in treatment at least for 1 month post-release, and we saw that as a positive thing. Now, what can we be doing better? We can continue to partner with the community to get them to take some responsibility for these, what people have coined now as returning citizens. That we can do the best work we can behind the walls of our institutions, but the vast majority of the treatment effect happens once people transition into the community. And if you don't have a community that's ready and willing to provide them the services and access to ongoing treatment, then you're going to fall flat on your face, and ultimately people will be back to committing more offenses. The other thing that happened to us, anybody who knows anything about prison-based, evidence-based practices, the backbone of that is risk, need, responsivity. Risk is risk to recidivate. Need is the criminogenic needs that led to their criminality, and responsivity is getting them access to the services in a way that they can best learn and be treated. So from a public safety model, risk to recidivate doesn't always catch the risk to overdose. So in 2014, we shifted to a hybrid model that took into consideration what someone's risk was to overdose and started opening up our treatment continuum to all risk levels. Now, I don't believe the research has yet caught up to that phenomenon, but at some point they do have to look at the risk principle and having a modification to it, including those people who are at risk to overdose. And I think that's what thing that we did back in 2014. So we're now treating all of our folks regardless of their risk level. So that's pretty much what we've done in Massachusetts. And I'm not going to get into a debate on which medication works best for which person. We have our reasons for offering Vivitrol as a pre-release injection and treatment option. What happens in the community is between the doctor and that client. And we also employ reentry navigators who work with the offender prior to discharge and then provide supportive case management in the community. And we don't steer people towards one treatment option in the community. That's, once again, what becomes between the doctor and that client. We also understand that addiction is an extremely complex issue that no singular treatment can resolve. You have to have the corresponding counseling to start to, what I've heard some people say, rewire the person's brain. Addiction we're talking about today, almost as if, in a term that I find very frustrating. I've lived through addiction, through people I know. I've seen the frustrations around people who I just don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. And addiction is not a linear path. It's a spiral in which people go forward, then fall back, go forward and fall back. And not one approach is going to work, and not one episode of treatment in most cases is going to work. So I'm pleased to acknowledge that we do have drugs in our system, and people do get disciplinary reports, but we've moved away from a straight consequence-based approach and are now looking at providing people with treatment in lieu of a consequence and dismissing the discipline. So I heard that, why are we treating a medical issue with a punishment? In some cases you have to do it, but you also have to provide incentives and acknowledge that people are going to lapse, not once, not twice, but it's different for every person, and our obligation is to provide them access to treatment up until the day they're releasing and then into the community. So I think that's where we are within the Commonwealth. What can we do better? Creating those linkages and bridges into the community to keep people engaged in treatment, so when those stresses really start to kick in and those neural pathways that have been dormant for years begin to fire, that we provided them the counseling to begin to rewire their brains and the medication to block those urges and cravings, so they can go out into the community and be productive members of our society. I'm done.
So, as it was introduced, my name is Peter Koutoujian. I'm the sheriff of Middlesex County. I'm hoping to share with you a little bit of some of the work we've done with medication-assisted treatment. Before I begin, I want to just, we've got Joanna Alvaroa Ellison who is here. Joanna is a BC social work master's student. She's doing work with our office to help us with data. She's also a Rappaport fellow, I just want to say, so thank you very much for Mr. Rappaport. We also have Crystal Miskey, who is also helping us with a lot of our data work, as well as a couple of other folks here. It should be noted that I'm also a Rappaport fellow. I graduated from the Kennedy School of Government, and the Rappaport Fellowship allowed me to attend there at a time I really could not have afforded to attend. So I'm forever indebted and appreciative of the Rappaports and for what they do for public policy consideration. I'm going to ask for 30 seconds right here because I want to give you a little piece of advice. I flew into Augusta, Maine last night through Cape Air. You know those tiny little planes? And I gave a presentation to the Maine sheriffs, a little bit longer version of the one I'm going to provide you today. If you are flying Cape Air, don't be the last one to get to the gate, because they will kick you out based on the weight considerations that have already, the other people that are already in there. So you're not kicked out of the seat, you're kicked out of the weight class. So as I've tried to plead with the woman saying, I have to speak to a very important panel, it's the Rappaport program. She didn't really care that much. But so just understand, you can actually get off because you're going to add too much weight to the thing, and the people there weighed too much that showed up before you. I never considered that to be an issue. All right, so let's see. So I'm just going to give you a snapshot of Middlesex County. It's 1.6 million people. It's about a quarter of the state of Massachusetts. Pretty populous, 54 cities and towns. And so the program we run is actually interesting because it actually sort of crosses over between urban municipalities, suburban municipalities, as well as rural towns. So it's really something that in many ways can be applied in so many ways, right? I mean, it's a pretty big county. You can see our population inside is about 1,000. 40% sentenced, 60% pretrial. By the way, that has changed. We used to be much more sentenced and less pretrial. That has shifted. That should be concerning to all of us. Our numbers are down in Massachusetts. The numbers are down everywhere in Massachusetts, which is a good thing overall. Let's see what else. We've got a budget that's really not of that much concern to you folks here. I served in the legislature for 14 years. I chaired the Committee on Healthcare. During that period of time in 2005, I created and chaired the commission to study OxyContin and prescription drug abuse, because this was kind of becoming hot at the time. It was just after the armed robberies, if you guys remember all the armed robberies going on, but it was still a major problem. We actually had this amazing group get together. We wrote this very thorough report. It was really an excellent piece of work. Sadly, you know, that year we had 550 opioid-related deaths. You know, here we are 12 years later. We know now what we knew then, basically, and we've got over 2,000 opioid-related deaths, right? This is really troubling because we know now what we knew then. We just haven't acted upon it. We haven't been able to change that. In our shop, 80% self-reported drug or alcohol addicted. Get this number, 42% needed medical detox when they entered our facility. Over 2,000 men entering our facility off the street, either pretrial or sentence, needed to be detoxed medically. That's a pretty significant number, right? And 25% didn't have health insurance. It's you know, a lot of resources on services inside, and then sending people back onto the street. They were unable to find care. They had no support. In fact, all the support they had out there was bad support. You know, it wasn't lifting them up, it was dragging them down. Their social networks, very sad. No follow-up or continuity of care. Here you can see in Massachusetts, by the way, 60% of those are involving fentanyl at least, or at least 1,300, might be more now, of those deaths in 16 or fentanyl related. You know, we've been losing the war on opioids, and now we've got a new foe here that's even worse. It's fentanyl. 400 people die as a result of motor vehicle deaths in Massachusetts. Imagine in Boston, you're 5 times more likely to die as a result of an overdose than by being killed in a motor vehicle crash. This is our breakdown of those that are detoxed. This is from July of 17, 160, just over 160 men. You can see our alcohol is about 18%, benzos 8%, non-opioid polysubstance, probably cocaine and other things like that, some of the chemical, other stuff, less than 1%. Pure opioids, only opioids, 17%, and opioid polysubstance, meaning opioids and other substances, 55%. So 73% of those that we had to detox had opioids in their system. Medication-assisted treatment and correction is the intersection of public safety and public health. We're actually using almost a public health model to affect public safety, to improve public safety. And because addiction and mental health are major drivers of crime, those are the things that we're tackling here. This is just to tell you about the window of opportunity. You know, it sounds weird to think about the benefit sometimes, and I'll kind of give this a caveat in a moment, of being in jail, windows of opportunity. They're away from their toxic living environment, the people that are pulling them down all the time. They have access to medical care 24 hours, 7 days a week. We've had 150,000 contacts in 2015. Lowell General ER at 100,000, right? That's a busy ER. It just goes to show you in our small shop how many people we're attending to because there's sick people in there. We have the largest mental health facility in Middlesex. That's not unusual for any county in the country. The 3 largest mental health treatment facilities are LA, Rikers, and Cook County jails. We're the largest in Middlesex. The traditional health care barriers are eliminated. They have access to health insurance. They have access to it. By the way, the only place that they have a constitutional right to health care in this country is really in jails. They have access to a primary care physician. There are no co-pays or deductibles or private pays in our place. There's no distractions or obstacles. You don't have to get to work, and you got to get your this and that, you know, and all the things that I need a navigator in my life. I need someone to help me in my life because I'm stressed out as it is. And I have my license, and I have a job, and I have a wife, and I have my children. I have all these things, and I'm stressed out. For a lot of these folks, it's just so overwhelming when they get back out, so they need that help. Treatment beds are always available. We specialize in substance use treatment, and we have access to programs and services that address the issue of addiction specifically. Now, I'll say this, I'm really proud of the programs we have in the Middlesex Sheriff's Office, this and a number of others that are innovative, creative, cutting edge, and I'm really proud of them. I'll crow about them all day, but you shouldn't have to come to jail to get good treatment. You should be able to get this out in the community. So I don't want you to ever think I think this is a great thing. This can be a great thing for some people, but for many people, they shouldn't have to come to jail to get good treatment. So what are our medication-assisted treatment directed to opioid recovery? Increasing MAT to the most vulnerable at-risk populations. Harm reduction, that first, especially the first 72 hours to 2 weeks, the times of the overdoses is very significant. Governor's report said that the risk of death rate is 120 times higher for those recently released from incarceration, so it's a really vulnerable population. If we can use the medication that we use to get them by that period of time, we can save a lot of lives. We reduce crimes by reducing the drivers that make them. and we combine, this is really important, the medication-assisted treatment with critical casework follow-up. So you got your medication, but you've got your treatment. Don't ever think you can just take a drug and then it's okay, because that's what got us into this problem in the first place, right? So medication and treatment is really important. And then we track measures to determine how we're doing. This is what's really important. We use Vivitrol. It's an injectable, it's non-opioid, it's non-addictive, it blocks the highs, reduces the cravings. We use that. We use our participants are not obligated. They sign up for us for 6 months of monitoring, and we help them out. We have access to their healthcare data during that 6 months. We have their primary, secondary, tertiary contacts, so we can track them down and find out what's going on should they miss an appointment. This is something I took from my healthcare days. It's a case manager, patient manager. It works really well in there. You know, makes them a lot healthier and also reduces costs. We applied it here. We actually use this. It's all volunteer. We work collaboratively with researchers to identify data trends, provide critical. We work with UMass Medical. We actually make adjustments based on the data that we have coming in. So we'll actually see data coming in, and we'll make an adjustment midstream in the way we're doing things to correct what we see going on, which is the great thing about data. You don't have data, you can't make that decision intelligently, right, or educatively. How do we define it? 6 months post-release following compliance. After this, they're back onto their way. We'll just show you a few numbers. This is all individuals. There's over 300 people that we put through this program. We get about 15 to 20 per month. About 90%, 80 to 90% are self-referred, so which is something we did not foresee. We thought they're going to come from drug court or our own residential substance abuse treatment program. They're actually becoming self-referred, a couple from attorneys or parents that know about the program too. So they're kind of motivated. Here you can see of all 300 people, about a 10% recidivism rate, 4.5% violation of parole rate, 84% no recidivism. I mean, that's the thing we kind of sometimes have to look at, right? You heard Felice speak about the numbers before of high rates of recidivism. These are pretty remarkable. This is including those that have failed or failed to report to our program too. These are not just all the people that did what we asked them to do. This is everyone. We're going to be honest about our data.
2 minutes.
Here you can see our active participants. By the way, that 5%, that's a running 5%. This is going on for 2 years. It's not just 1 year. This is 2 years. If someone actually has an arrest during that first 6 months when they're on the program, whether they fail the program or not, we continue to look in the future if they receive a conviction. We'll actually then add that into that 5%. So that's a real number, right? When Kashif said, oh, well, this is really the right way to do it, I wasn't really happy with him for suggesting this, but the fact is we want to report real results and honest results. Here for all the completed, this is all those that even have not successfully completed the program, 7% recidivism, 6% violations of probation. This is the program when we started. Our first version of our program failed. We learned from that failure, by the way. Let's not be afraid to fail, because if you're not trying, you're never gonna fail, and you're never going to succeed. So we took this model. This is our first version. This is part of the reason it failed. We only had 3 or 4 community health providers. This is what we have now. Take a look at that across this state, right? Well over 100 providers that work with us and are actually seeking our business. And not only that, will actually help notify us if someone are missing appointments. We don't even have to check on them. I think I'm going to be done in my 2 minutes here, so just give me that extra 30 seconds. So for incarcerated healthcare, sure, we got to speak about healthcare, Medicaid expansion. Maine is not an expansion state yet. It's hard to talk to them about how you can provide this help for people, especially when you've got Suboxone, methadone, Vivitrol that you need to provide for people. Who's going to pay for that when they get out? Let's see, what else? No, that's just about the suspension versus termination. We've saved a lot of money through this program as well. And then I think this is where I close off. Medication assist, but the program is the treatment. That navigator, that person that stays in touch with them, that they call to see if they made their appointments, that the first call that individual makes when they have a child, when they get married, or when they graduate, or they get their high school equivalency, the first call they make is not to someone that they knew before, it's to the navigator, because it's the only positive mentor, role model they have in their lives at that time. That's the secret to this. The medication is important, but it's the treatment that really makes it work. Thank you. Doc, you probably know how to do that stuff. I don't know how to do that stuff.
Really excited to be here at the Rappaport Center. The sheriff and I were just talking about how we've been seeing each other at at other events, and it's a time now when doctors, lawyers, and corrections are actually getting together to talk about this issue. And so that's a really good thing. He mentioned public health, public safety partnership. We're talking about one example today. There's a lot of other ways that public safety and public health are already, I think in Massachusetts, in a lot of ways, ahead of other states as far as how we're working together. And this is definitely one of the key pieces that we need to be thinking about and discussing. So before I met lawyers and corrections and police officers and firefighters who were thinking about addiction and the opioid crisis, I was a doctor and seeing patients, which I still do now. And where one of the places I see patients is in a primary care practice. I have an interest in addiction, and I have actually, I'm lucky enough to have a little addiction team that's based in that primary care practice. Within our addiction team, we offer buprenorphine or Suboxone and naltrexone or Vivitrol for people with an opioid use disorder. And we offer medication for alcohol use disorders. We've embedded counselors in the clinic, and we work with community providers. What we can't offer is methadone. And I'll talk more about methadone in a second. Regulatorily, methadone is segregated into a separate system, okay, which is called the OTP system, or Opioid Treatment Program System. And I also work in that system, so I'll talk about that in a second. But just from what I know from my patients in my primary care practice who are coming to me looking for treatment, is that I can't tell you when somebody comes in to see me whether they are going to be the one who succeeds or not, or whether they're going to be the one who doesn't do well or not, and I can't tell about the specific medication. Now, I ask a lot of questions, and we do a lot of discussing, and we really try our best to match the treatment with the patient. One of the things, so when I see a new patient, I do ask them about their incarceration history, and that is, that actually plays into their course of their addiction, because for some of my patients, that's the time that they consider their longest period of abstinence, is when they were incarcerated. I'm very interested in seeing what periods of abstinence are, because over time, what generally happens with most people is their periods of use decrease and their periods of abstinence increase. Ideally, people are moving towards using less over time. Most of the patients that are coming to me, that's what they're looking for. So one of the things that happens to people is they get incarcerated in the midst of using substances, and then hopefully they get some interaction inside and then are referred to a program on the outside. That's starting to happen more than it used to, so that's a good thing. There are times when people get incarcerated while they're on treatment, right? And so I oftentimes have patients coming to me looking for buprenorphine who are arrested and incarcerated when they were on methadone. And it's interesting what happens in a lot of these cases. So the person presenting to the methadone clinic may have outstanding warrants and charges, and they want to get into treatment, and so they get started on a medication like methadone, and then the warrants come up. And so they've actually gotten onto treatment, stopped committing crimes, but they still hang on to those warrants, right? And in some cases, ideally, a judge sees, it depends on the crime, of course, that the patient is in treatment, and that means no jail time. But in other times, they have to serve jail time or serve prison time. And what happens in that point is there's forcible withdrawal. So at least, unless you're in Rhode Island. So the person now has to go through, usually medicated with medications that don't help tremendously, but they go through 2 to 3 to 4 weeks of withdrawal. And that withdrawal while they're incarcerated, that doesn't stigmatize their heroin use. It actually stigmatizes for them in their own mind their methadone treatment. And so they're coming to me saying, Doc, yeah, the methadone worked fantastically for the 6 months I was on it, but when I was incarcerated, I got taken off it, and it was the worst experience of my life, being incarcerated and going through that withdrawal, and I'll never do methadone again. They don't think I'll never do heroin again, they think I'll never do methadone again. Heroin does not get stigmatized in the same way when you're incarcerated while you're using heroin as while you're incarcerated while you're doing methadone. I don't have a great explanation for why that is. I think it has to do with the fact that methadone is a long-acting medication. It doesn't have the euphoria upside that heroin does, so it doesn't have that sort of positive reinforcement. People are left with that negative reinforcement, and it really stigmatizes the treatment. So that's one thing. One of the messages I want to get across is when we think about how we're going to offer treatment on the inside, we need to offer treatment. It's a life or death matter. A lot of the other speakers have made that point. In Rhode Island, they offer all 3 medications. The wall has not come down, the place has not collapsed. They're able to do it. It's consistent with what has been supported through several international organizations and most other countries that have, well, no country has an opioid problem as bad as we do now, but if you go back 15, 20 years, we were, that's where we were along with other countries. So I want to tell you about a couple other patients that kind of illuminate the thinking, and this will be more, again, focused on methadone. So it turns out that to be on methadone maintenance treatment, there are federal regulations require me to document 12 months of continuous addiction to an opioid. There are 2 exceptions to that rule, that 12-month rule. One is a pregnant person. So if you're pregnant, I can actually initiate methadone maintenance treatment only before I don't have to prove that you had 12 months of addiction. I can initiate a pregnant patient right away. And it turns out for pregnant women, methadone is the standard of care. Now, more and more they're being treated with buprenorphine. Vivitrol is not really offered for pregnant women. The other group that has the exception is the person coming out of incarceration. There's a recognition that in the federal guidelines that somebody coming out of incarceration has an elevated risk of overdose and of relapse, and that we need to loosen up the regulation around having that 12 months of opioid addiction. So there's a recognition there. Okay, so another patient that I see is the pregnant women. So at the methadone maintenance program that I work at, which the city of Boston used to have their own methadone maintenance program, and they contracted with the Suffolk County House of Corrections. And it turns out that methadone has been being offered in Massachusetts incarcerated settings for decades to pregnant women. So the idea that it can't be done with other people, I mean, it's actually harder to treat a pregnant woman than it is to treat somebody, and it's not that hard, than it is to treat somebody who isn't pregnant. So it is the standard of care, and it's the standard of care for non-pregnant people to not treat a pregnant woman. Now, there are states that don't treat pregnant women, don't get me wrong, but that's really getting into barbaric territory. I would argue it is a very obvious violation of the Bill of Rights, of the right to health care, as Sheriff Koutoujian mentioned. So, okay, so I have a pregnant woman. She's incarcerated. She's at my methadone clinic. In the old days, actually, she came in shackles and chains every single day, driven by 2 corrections officers, 2 blocks, right? So you can literally see the Suffolk County House of Corrections from the methadone clinic. Those guys, those corrections officers, had to, they were off for 2 to 3 hours. They couldn't be doing their jobs in the corrections setting. So they come, they dose, then they go back. Turns out now, we've evolved, and pregnant women can actually dose in what is essentially a hospital in the Suffolk County House of Corrections. I'm sure it's similar in Middlesex. These are real healthcare facilities with real nurses, real doctors. They can deliver very sophisticated care, and methadone is not that sophisticated. Okay, so now she goes... Okay, all right, so I'll finish up on this story. So let's say she just tells me, as I'm interviewing and admitting her, that she isn't so sure that this is a pregnancy, that she wants to continue, that she wants to have a termination or an abortion. So in the old days, once you're not pregnant, at least the jail that I was working with, you no longer were eligible for medication. okay? Meaning her methadone would have been immediately stopped after she had her termination or her abortion. So that is what it is. It just doesn't seem right, I think, in a lot of ways, and not surprising. Most incarcerated women on methadone are not going to choose a termination or an abortion in that setting. Now, let's say she delivers, and this is a case that just we've started to see more of these cases. Turns out I hadn't seen that many deliveries in the incarcerated setting. Well, it's the same deal. She delivers, she stays in the hospital until she gets through the delivery, and then she comes back to the incarcerated setting, and at that point, she's not offered methadone anymore. She has forced withdrawal, okay? Not only is she separated from her newborn, so that's what happened. So we recently have worked with Suffolk County House of Corrections. We've advocated for a few of these patients now who are able to continue their methadone through their postpartum period, through their discharge, and then continue after release from incarceration. This is something that the staff has been very, meaning the medical staff, and I think now more the corrections staff is open to. And so I think we're starting to see really the opening of the idea that this is really healthcare. There are certainly huge security issues, but I think that the not speaking from being there myself, these are issues that I think that can be worked through. They've been worked through in other countries, in other settings, and now in other states. So I'm going to end there. I look forward to the discussion, and thanks for the opportunity.
I have a few questions, and then I'll let you guys go. But I would like very much, if we could follow up on Dr. Walley's comments. We need to make really clear here, when Commissioner Mitchell and Sheriff Koutoujian are talking about medication-assisted treatment in Massachusetts settings, they're talking about a Vivitrol shot 30 days before you leave, or at some point shortly before you leave. What's happening in Rhode Island is unique. They are providing methadone or buprenorphine while people are incarcerated. No one else is doing that. So I would like to understand from the Massachusetts people why you're not using those medications in prison setting.
I guess I'll start. We only started to utilize medication-assisted treatment back in September 2014. We've had a huge issue with the diversion of Suboxone back then and even today. We felt that it was in our best interest to start with Vivitrol as a pre-release injection because it was the safest way for us to start with medication-assisted treatment. Now, we'll learn from Rhode Island. There's legislation pending right now that talks about offering the 3 different types of medication as for people who come in need of it. So we'll evolve with the legislation and we'll evolve with the research. So at this point, what we feel most comfortable with is offering the treatment we're offering. And then lastly, we have a different population than a jail. Most of our people come into our system having awaited trial or not in need of medical detox. So I understand there's different populations that have different needs. I don't know that we have the same population, but I'm not going to say that at some point in the future we won't entertain other types of medications, either through the legislation or through as we evolve and better understand and able to perfect the way we administer our program.
So one thing that's really important to understand is which the right medication is for which person. You have people that believe only in antagonists, the naltrexone. You've got people that believe very strongly, maybe not only in methadone or Suboxone. The fact is, it's not what we believe, it's what's going to work on that individual. And I think one of the great future hopes is that science will tell us, okay, this type of medication treatment is appropriate for this person or that person. As Chris had said, our #1 most contraband item in our jails is Suboxone. Whether it's smuggled in bodily, mail, it's atomized and soaked into papers and watercolors. And this is not used for self-treatment, you know, self-medication inside. This is used because you get high from it. So this is a significant issue for us. It's a contraband inside. Anytime you enter contraband, you have problems because threats, extortion, you know, people can get hurt. By the way, it should be noted that with Suboxone, with Vivitrol, there's no contraband value to this at all. It's not addictive. You can't smuggle it around. One thing that we're going to have to think about in corrections that will change things slightly from a more philosophical is when it comes time for the injectable Suboxone, right? That's going to change things because that can't be diverted. The diversion is a significant issue for us. And so when you begin, I mean, you've got the rods that you can put in, right? In jail, that's nothing. I mean, you'll just rip that right out and give it to someone. That'll be nothing for you to do. So that's an issue. So when it becomes injectable, that will be something we'll take a significant more look at because there won't be the security issues. What's also important to note, and Doctor, you kind of mentioned this, and I'd actually almost be interested in your perspective on it. You spoke about the people that go in and that were on methadone and then being detoxed because they had some past warrants. We actually started collecting information about those that were coming in, and what we found was anywhere from, you know, half to 3/4 of the people that were coming that we could verify had a prescription for methadone or Suboxone, also had the illegal drugs in their system. So, you know, so this is something that, you know, we have to understand. And again, the right MAT for the right person. I want to be very clear. So I'm not saying Vivitrol is better than the others. The right for the right person. But if you've got your Vivitrol, you can't shoot up with it. You can't get high. But when you use the others, you can use a Suboxone. You could technically use your methadone. You could still do other drugs. And that's what we find a lot of people coming in, so that when we're detoxing them, we're not just detoxing them only for a Suboxone or methadone. We're detoxing them for other drugs that are in their systems. And that's those we could verify with a verified prescription, which we do for every person coming in. We verify their medications. And those that we could actually, that they self-reported using other drugs while on this. So that's just something we have to deal with. And it might be that we come to the point where we maintain it from the outside and the inside. I don't know how we verify that it's only that stuff being used, or we forgive them for using illegal drugs and just don't detox them, just keep them on a methadone. We're going to have to come to this point where we figure out how we're going to handle that, but that's really what we're dealing with right now, and I think it's an important consideration that as we move forward, how we're going to go with correctional stuff. And there are a couple of shops in Massachusetts that are considering or moving in the direction of some MAT, of the agonist treatments here too, so I'm really interested to see what their experience is as well.
Agonist treatments is methadone and buprenorphine, right? It's that one. Just wanted to define that term in case people don't know.
Actually, I just couldn't hear you. Will you just say what you just said?
Oh, I was just defining agonist treatments. That refers to the opioids, methadone and buprenorphine.
So agonist is methadone
and Vivitrol is an antagonist.
Is antagonist.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just defining the term. Director Wall, could you address this issue of diversion? Since you've been making Suboxone available, has it had any effect on illegal use of it in the prison?
There's a black market in all prisons, and in ours, that black market can include the diversion of different drugs that are deemed illicit. We patrol, we test, we do what we feel we need to do in order to prevent the black market from flourishing, and yet people want the stuff.
But has it changed at all since you've introduced your treatment program?
We don't have the data on it yet, so we're working on the actual data, but anecdotally, Warden Dwyer has stated that there's been a decrease in the amount of Suboxone that she's seen come into the facility. What would happen in the jail is women know that they're going to be arrested, they're going to come in, and that's when most drugs are smuggled in. Now that people know, and in women's division, that's where we've been doing the program the longest. Now that people know they're not going to go through withdrawal, that we provide treatment, we've had, she believes, significantly less buprenorphine coming in. The reason we haven't been able to get those numbers directly is it is entered into the disciplinary record as contraband. So contraband can be, I had too many rolls of toilet paper, I took extra food from the commissary. So it's a lot of records to go through by hand to find out. We can't just press a button.
And I just want to piggyback on what you had just said. You said that the women are not introducing it now because they know they have access to it, so they don't have to worry about withdrawals. Our population are average 6 years in length, and they're bringing it in without having need of medical detox. It's a, as you said, it's a black market. It's worth a lot of money, and it's causing people to be assaulted. It's causing people to be having hits put on them. It's having people having to isolate and go into protective custody because of the debts they've accrued. So in a prison environment, whether it's whatever the contraband is, it's life and death when you start dealing with these types of illegal, illicit pieces of contraband. So I understand what you're saying. I don't disagree with you, but I'm lost with when people tell me the reason it's being smuggled is for treatment purposes, and I look at people who have been in a forced sobriety situation for years who are introducing, it's not for the sole purpose of providing people with medication to transition from admission to their detox. So I just find it to be, I've seen how it has impacted our system, and I've seen people go out in emergency rooms, not because of overdoses in some cases, but because of the assault they were involved in and the types of viciousness that's associated with it.
So
So I think
Dr. Walley, can you address that? Why would somebody want, I've often heard that you really can't get high on Suboxone, or can you? I mean, why would a prisoner who's already detoxed want to use Suboxone?
So I got a couple things to say about that. So speaking to my patients, which usually I like to present, gave some patient stories today. My patients who I start on buprenorphine almost always have tried it off the street, and they are using it on the street not to get high, but to treat their withdrawal.
Buprenorphine, Suboxone,
Yeah, so the buprenorphine, it's a partial agonist, and it can be prescribed through a doctor's office, not in a separate clinic like methadone.
But it's being used so they don't have to go through withdrawal between their fixes of illegal drugs too.
Or because they may maintain themselves on it for a long time and not use heroin because they want to start going to work, and then they don't have their connection.
Yeah, right.
I will say, my patients who talked about using buprenorphine or Suboxone in incarcerated settings, contraband buprenorphine, the environment actually does change the experience of using the buprenorphine in some cases. So there's a very small group of people who can get high off of buprenorphine or euphoric. One group are people who are totally naive, opioid naive, who've never been on opioids before. A buprenorphine tablet or film is about as strong as a Percocet or a Vicodin. So that's people who aren't used to that can get a buzz off of that. If you're using heroin, that isn't going to get you high. I can just tell you that. Now, when there is research that shows your environment very much changes the way you feel when you use a drug. Okay, and so if you're in an incarcerated setting, that some of my patients have told me I used a sliver of a sliver of a sliver of a buprenorphine film, and it made me feel high. So, but we aren't going to fix the human drive to get high. Like, that is normal. Everybody wants to have some euphoria, right? Everybody wants to feel that feeling. It's not just a person who has an addiction, honestly, and especially somebody who has an addiction who's incarcerated. It seems like, I don't know how we're ever going to turn that part of their brain off. It's going to be very difficult, I think. Now, if they're on a maintenance therapy like methadone, or they're being supplied the buprenorphine and they're on a constant dose, and then they use contraband buprenorphine, that's not going to make them high, right? Because they're blocked, essentially. Or if they're on injectable naltrexone behind the wall. So that's one thing. The other thing that the sheriff mentioned, I just want to reiterate, is that the medication-assisted treatment, which I don't like that term, medication for addiction treatment or medication for an opioid use disorder, I do disagree that this is like in other conditions where medication is one of the primary treatments. We shouldn't withhold medication that lowers people's overdose risk contingent on their willingness to do counseling. We want them to do counseling, and I agree that is more likely to help them in their recovery. But if we want to save lives, we got to get their medication into people as soon as we can and when they're at risk. That's the way we're really going to reduce overdoses. Now, there are people who are being treated for their opioid addiction with the medication who do use other substances. That is definitely the case, and we need to acknowledge that, and that is an issue for folks. Those other substances can be dangerous, but their overdose risk, even for them, is at least half as high and probably much lower than that when they're on the medication. So the 2,000 overdose deaths, if we really, like, that is the public health crisis. There's a lot more that goes into it, obviously, but we need to get people on, get people on these medications when they're vulnerable from overdose, and that's really, anytime they're out of an incarcerated setting. You guys have very few overdose deaths in your incarcerated settings, right? But as soon as they leave, they're very high.
So, and if I can piggyback on what the doctor was saying. So, one, in correctional facilities, you don't know what you don't know. So when Jennifer's speaking about, is there more Suboxone contraband coming in, you don't know that unless you discover it. So you really don't know what's out there. And this is really important to note because I remember we were seeing an uptick. We do some testing in our facility because we just want to be on top of this. So we'll actually do random testing, and then we have suspicion, go test. And there was a period of time when we were seeing a lot of hits. And we were getting very concerned, and we were doing what we needed to do to figure out what was going on, how it was getting in, where it was coming from, all that stuff. But I went to a sheriff's meeting, association meeting, and I had all 13 others with me, and I said, geez, we're just getting a lot more Suboxone in the place, and, you guys seeing the same thing? And they're all saying, nope. And I said, really? You guys aren't, because I think we're a pretty well-run facility, right? Pretty secure, well-run. I mean, I take pride in Middlesex Sheriff's Office. I'm proud of that institution. I think it's a good institution on every level. I said, nope. I said, you haven't seen any uptick? I said, nope. And I came back and I said to my special sheriff, I said, they don't see anything. And you know what he said? They're not testing. They don't know what's going on in there. So the fact is that, that's the only way you're going to know is if you test. Now, one other thing, I know because I have one of the best superintendents in the world, and I got him from the Department of Corrections. Thank you very much, Chris. It was a great gain for me. It was a terrible loss for DOC because he's really wonderful. And he had, he was the reason we hired him was he was very good with the offender population. He spoke with them, he was respectful, he engaged with them. And he would actually tell me, and Chris, you probably know this, that he knew people that actually got addicted to Suboxone while incarcerated because that was the first time it was introduced to them. So it's just another, and that might happen more in a DOC facility. It could happen in mine, I suppose. And one last thing, too. We speak about harm reduction. I think it's really important that this, the agonists, the Suboxone and methadone, are harm reduction tools. But let's not forget that the other naltrexone can be as well, especially that first 3 days to 2 weeks as you get out, because you can't get high and it reduces the cravings. And so this is a great harm reduction tool, and it's a very different methodology. But understand this, we've got 300 people that went through our program. We've got, you saw our recidivism rates, one of our numbers that, just went up #1 recently, out of the 300 that successfully completed the program and might have failed since then perhaps. Those that never completed the program, failed during the program, relapsed many times. We've had 4 overdose deaths out of that entire 300 people. Now, and only 1 came recently. Now, that's 4 too many as far as I'm concerned, but I would think that this cohort that's getting out of jail, that's going back to the street, that's highly addicted, that's probably a decent number, and I've asked Cash to figure if we can find a way to compare an apple to an apple with regular, with other numbers. We're trying to find a way to see how good that is. I think it's a pretty decent number. I'm not proud that we have 4. I got to be honest with you, so I'm not happy with that. But I think that also shows in some ways, I think it can reduce harm as well.
I'd like to open it up to questions. Yes. Yeah.
What sort of mental health services do they get in prison? I know there's RGL, I know there's a lot of comorbidities, a lot of people self-medicate, when they're on the street. So what sort of things are you doing for that?
I think the last 5 years especially, we've made significant advances in partially through some litigation. But when I started, and even 10 years ago when I was a deputy superintendent, I had very limited options. If somebody was, in my mind, had a mental illness, I would say, oh, it's personality disorder, or that guy's nuts. And now I believe we have an actual mental health continuum that assesses everybody when they come in, assigns them a designation. We have several different treatment units, residential treatment units at every security level. Other than minimum, we have specialized units as diversion from restrictive housing. So they have it on demand. If an inmate is having a mental health crisis, anybody can make a referral, whether it's a correction officer or CPO, the inmate themselves. So I'm sure we could do better, but I think we have a fairly expansive continuum of mental health services for offenders.
So at Middlesex, 46% of those that have been newly admitted last year had a history of mental health. Right? This is why we say we're basically a treatment facility, sadly. About a third are being treated for some type of mental health issue. You know, suicide in places of incarceration is always our greatest worry, one of the greatest things we pay attention to, because let me tell you something, it's not just a suicide in our shops, it is a loss because we've failed to do our job to protect that person even from themselves. You feel lost, don't think anyone doesn't, especially because you may have known that guy, the SEALs might have known that guy, or that woman for many years as they've come through, right? So they might have known them, so it's a real loss. And actually, when someone suicides, you know, we immediately send an employee assistance program team to those officers that are attending to that, or even the attempts to, because it's something we take very seriously. But think about this, 40%, so you get your 46% of a history of mental health, 40% of our new entries have a Q5, meaning they've actually had a query that they've answered, yes, I've thought about suicide, I've attempted suicide. So 40% at some point in their public safety career have had a Q5 attached to them. So it's a highly ill population. Bruce, you kind of spoke about the issue of this. The co-occurrence rate is really important as we consider how to deal with substance use and mental health. In our shop, 76% of those with mental health issues also have a co-occurring substance use disorder. That's a pretty, you know, that number is not unusual. You go to national shops that have really good data, it's always the same. Kind of makes me proud because our data is basically where theirs are. So it shows, I think it validates for us. And what we do, and I know that DOC does, is, and I don't know that other sheriff's offices do that necessarily in Massachusetts or across the country, but when they come in and they come in for all their checkups, they go to the medical unit, but the next stop is mental health. Every single person gets a mental health assessment, right? And that is really crucial in what we do at the Middlesex because we dovetail that into every decision that's made about them, where they go, what the programs are. If they go into restrictive housing, do they have mental health issues that we need to address or deal with? Will they decompensate quickly? So I've heard it said from the American Correctional Association when they came, they've never seen a shop dovetail the mental health needs with the general health needs. And every time there's a decision made on classification, on discipline, restrictive housing, all this stuff, our Laura, our mental health director, is always being consulted. And she says it wasn't always like that, and she doesn't know of another shop like that, but she's a point of consultation for almost every person when they're having issues, because they always check that stuff. So it is a huge piece of what we do, only complicated by substance use issues.
Rhode Island is similar, except for our women's facility, where the rates are much higher.
Much higher, yeah.
There was another question, yes.
I have a question for Director Wall. What would you say to people like Mr. Mitchell who say, we're doing everything we can to stem the flow of Suboxone into our institution? It makes me very nervous to think about bringing it in ourselves because of the diversion issue. What have you done to try to prevent diversion of Suboxone into the general population?
It's a constant battle because while Suboxone is not necessarily good for you in those circumstances, as I said before, people have a craving, and they will stop at very little in order to have their needs satisfied. At the extreme, people will hurt and kill for opioids, and we're in a running battle back and forth to make sure that we keep the institutions as clean and free as possible.
There's a difference between people smuggling in Suboxone through the mail or all the various ways they do it and diverting it from the medical system. Are there ways to sort of protect the legitimate prescribed Suboxone from getting diverted into the population?
The medical
So-
director will answer that question.
What we've done, we started off with the tablets instead of the film, because they were so much cheaper. But
It was
the
easier
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the, what I say, the security being happy was priceless, in switching over to the film. So the film is much harder to divert. We've come up with protocols in each facility where people getting Suboxone, you drink a glass of water before, get a mouth check before, get the medication, and then depending on where it's done, you either have to have your hands on the table the whole time, or stand with your hands behind your back until it is dissolved, and then they do another mouth check. And that hasn't eliminated diversion, but it's helped a lot. We found other things like dentures. People have to remove their dentures before. I think that was the main issue.
So it's a weird world in which we live, isn't it, though?
Yeah, but they definitely
because
didn't.
Letters.
And by the way, that's pretty resource intensive. As you're having to give someone, have them, you bring them before you. This is not a typical med pass, and so we haven't done this, but we know that one of the things, if we're considering doing this is something we have to consider the resources necessary. These guys will cheek anything. You know, you give them any kind of medication. It can be just an aspirin. They'll cheek it and just save it for later for whatever, right? I mean, it's kind of like, you know, it's like, I basically, they look for mischief for unknown reasons, right? So it'll be something that won't get you high, but they will cheek it and save up a stash for some reason, right? So with something like this, they will definitely try to do that. So you have to bring them out, and actually you would know this, Jennifer, more, but our concern is you got to bring them out, you got to watch them, got to drink the water, then you got to put the thing in their mouth, then you got to watch them with their hands on the table for, is it 15 minutes, I think, maybe? Or?
Well, now it takes about 3 minutes, but it was taking 20 minutes
Yeah,
for the
okay.
tablets to
Yeah.
dissolve.
Yeah, so that was
So
the tablets, I see,
the
so that's different,
tablets
okay.
were-
And then kind of make sure, check the
We gotta get to some
cheeks.
other questions. Sorry. You had a question? No? Okay.
I mean, I do have a question, but I didn't want to.
No, I think that, I just want to kind of point out, it's a different resource that you need, and you got to have people watching that a whole time. So now you're going to have a med pass, but you're going to have several people over there with this too. So it's just the way you have to deal with it in a correctional setting. Still might be the right thing to do, but it's a different way of using your resources too.
I just wanted to follow up on the diversion question. I had a conversation with one superintendent about the amount of illegal drugs coming in, and at that time, I don't know if this is a constant, but Suboxone, a lot of Suboxone was coming in because it's so easy to get in on paper. And I'm saying, well, what would using Suboxone medically, you know, this superintendent's concern wasn't so much that it would be diverted, because there is so much out there in the population that diversion wasn't even really a concern. It was, the concern was, you know, how do you stay, if you're using opioid substitution as part of treatment for addiction, and there's so much temptation around, you know, is it going to be effective if there's all this temptation? Which seems like a much lesser risk to me than diversion, you know, and I guess the effectiveness is something that, but I guess the question is, you know, what's given, you know, is that a fair assumption that there's so much out there that it kind of diminishes the concern about a diversion, or is that not always true?
I don't get the sense that there's so much out there that it's not real, diversion is not an issue. Again, you don't know what you don't know, but I would think that if it was that much of an issue, I mean, I hope it's not my superintendent that told you that, right? So, all right, okay. That would be bad. No, I don't know. We, you know, again, we check up as much as we can. We always have issues, but I would never say for a moment that we have so much out there that diversion wouldn't really be problematic. Firstly, it would be problematic no matter what, but secondly, that theory of that it's not as impactful because there's so much out there, I don't think that that's really
Well,
true.
it wouldn't be diversion.
Yeah.
It's 5 o'clock, our time is up, we have to leave. This has been wonderful, thank you, everyone.